Well, good morning, all. It is wonderful to be gathering with you today. Let's begin with a prayer. God be with you. Let us pray. Oh God, we give you thanks for a new day. We pray that you pour out your blessing upon those of us who are gathered here for some conversation. We pray that you pour out your blessing upon this nation. We pray that you be in our speaking, in our listening, in our acting, and in our loving, that your love may blossom and flourish. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. So I'm delighted to be here with so many of you, delighted to be here with David Ignatius and Sylvia Burwell, fellow Columbans. And before I introduce them and we get started, I just want to let you know a couple of things. First of all, we're going to be keeping participants on mute for this conversation. But we're eager to have you participate and make comments or ask questions. And if you would do so by using the chat box function. And Sylvia and David and I will get us started, and then we'll be welcoming comments and questions after about 20 or 30 minutes. And Molly Reynolds, who co-chairs the adult formation team, will be feeding questions as we go forward. We are recording this conversation just to have for St. Columba's use. If you wish to be not seen or not identified, you can do something to your screen so that nobody knows you're here. A special welcome. David Ignatius is the Associate Editor and Columnist of the Washington Post. He writes frequently, regularly on global politics, economics, and international affairs. His efforts were duly noted and praised for his particular work in recent years on the murder in Saudi Arabia of Jamal Khashoggi. I think of David, I think of you as something of a Renaissance man. The first conversation we had, I learned you were busily writing a libretto based on an update of The Prince by Machiavelli for the National Dutch Opera. David has written 11 novels, and one of which I'm just digging into. I recommend it, The Paladin. And he and his wife, Eve, have 3 grown daughters. And I think you've been at St. Columba's for about 35 years. And Sylvia Mathews Burwell is the 15th president of American University. She's the first woman to serve in that capacity. She served before as Secretary of the United States Department of Health and Human Services, during which she oversaw the implementation of the Affordable Care Act and led the department's response both to Ebola and Zika outbreaks. Prior to serving, she also served in the OMB, Office of Management and Budget, directed that office, and prior to years with the Obama administration, was president of the Walmart Foundation, and before that, president of the Global Development Program of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And Sylvia and Stephen and Helene and Matthew have been coming to St. Columba's for just over a year, I think, having moved out to this part of town recently, and it's wonderful to get to know you and have you be here. So thank you. Thank you both. It was in Springfield, Illinois in 1858, in his acceptance speech to be the Republican nominee for president, that then Senator Abraham Lincoln quoted Jesus saying, "A house divided against itself cannot stand." With 75 million ballots cast in their favor, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris may rightly claim a mandate, yet with 70 million ballots cast for President Trump and Vice President Pence, we have each candidate and the parties they represent with markedly different visions of America and markedly different stories of who we are and who we might become. And I'm wondering what steps are needed at this time for the healing of the nation, taking to heart that a house divided cannot stand. And Sylvia and David, I'm interested to know how each of you would frame some of the challenges and the opportunities, maybe the dangers and dreams that lie ahead. And I don't know, if one of you wants to jump in, I'd love to hear what your thoughts.
David, please.
Well, I'll begin by thanking Ledlie and saying hello across the Zoom channel to my friends at St. Columba's. What I think many of us have been feeling, probably most people on this Zoom forum have been feeling in the last 24 hours is a sense of joy, a sense of celebration. And I have to remind myself that celebration among those who believe that justice has been done, a good outcome has been reached, isn't the same as healing. Our celebration doesn't heal our world, and it certainly by itself doesn't reach out to the, as Ledlie said, the 70 million people who didn't want to see Donald Trump go, who believe, many of them passionately, that he's the person, the man the country needs. And so I've been trying to think what healing means. It's an easy word to use, but it's hard for me to think what it really will look and feel like. I found myself reflecting on FDR's, Franklin Roosevelt's, healing of a broken world after World War II, and I had to remember that it was unconditional surrender. It wasn't accommodation. Roosevelt, early in the war, to the shock of some of his advisors, had said, our goal is the unconditional surrender of Japan and Germany, our adversaries. And there's some people, I think, who've wanted unconditional surrender by the other side, a capitulation. And that clearly isn't going to happen. The result tells us that that Trump's supporters, Trumpism, if you will, is alive. So I think there couldn't be a better person to help us understand what healing might be than Joe Biden. The qualities that sometimes made him seem a kind of a passive candidate, sometimes not very good in making big speeches, a man who really was of the center, a creature of Washington compromise. I think those qualities can lead to an outreach to his former colleagues in the Senate, as he keeps saying in every speech, he's been pitch perfect the last 48 hours, reaching out to the people who didn't vote for him as much as the people who did. But I'll just close this thought, Ledlie, and then turn it over to Sylvia, with the thought that it's crucial for Biden that the center that he inhabits, the place in which healing might take place, not be a soggy center of kind of least common denominator compromise, shows of outreach, but not the reality. The center in American politics somehow has to become dynamic again, the place where you get things done, where there's energy, where there's intensity, where there's passion, and you begin to actually make our toxic politics and our failing government work again. So that would be my opening thought, Ledlie, and I wanted, Sylvia's lived and done this. I just report on it, and so I'd love to know what Sylvia thinks.
Thank you, David.
Thank you, and just thank you all. Thanks, David. Great to join you, and Ledlie, thank you for having me, and thanks to the St. Columba's community for welcoming our family over this last year, and now almost year and a half that we've been members. So thank you. And I think when I think about this concept of healing, I think about that, as David said, it's an easy word to say, probably very hard to do. And we've seen that around the world at different points in time when people have really taken this on as a focused effort. And I think that healing has an element to it that's about process and how we are treated and how others are treated. And the process by which things happen and get done actually makes a difference. And then it's also about substance. And so I think in order for the nation to get to the questions of how do we heal, certainly I think that the process questions, and those I think people know and understand, that listening and treating others with respect and truly actually hearing, all of that process, I think there is some understanding of that. I think some of the substance we understand less well, excuse me, in terms of why there is such a divide in our country. And is the divide, I think there are probably different reasons. And, for some, are people holding different values? And, I think we have to ask ourselves those questions and then try and understand, are there really different values? And what part of this problem are really about values? Another part of the problem, maybe in terms of why we have a divide, is I would posit that I think as a nation, perhaps we have, as a nation, we've always been based on liberty and democracy, the concepts of freedom and the concepts of community. And perhaps are we in a space where part of the divide occurs because we have a little bit too much of the individual and not enough of the questions of community and how we think about those kinds of things? Or is the divide really on substantive issues? And there, I think it's really important. And when I was secretary of HHS, I always used to say, can we return to a substance-based approach and get facts and substance? Because I think we're in a world where phrases, and to use one of a different time, or although it still exists somewhat, is the word Obamacare and what that indicated to people, versus using what are we talking about? What are the facts and what is the substance, so that people can attach their thinking and decision making to actually what it is. And so I think there are a combination of things that are going to be required as a nation, because I think that the divide occurs in different ways for different people for different reasons. And so I think this is a complex problem, but one that we need to take head on, both in terms of process and in terms of the substance.
Thank you. I'm wondering what's possible then in this, as we enter this season of transition, and what would be things that would be recommended to do first. We've got 2.5 months. We heard last night President-elect Biden lay out some very specific executive action steps that he will take once he is in office. We also heard him name that he will be putting together as soon as tomorrow a task force, a team of people with scientists and others to prepare a pandemic response. Sylvia, I guess I'll turn to you and first, because when you and your the Burwell family came to get your backpacks and devices blessed to go back to school, you said something to me on the side of, if President Biden is elected, that there would be quite a different response to COVID. I don't know if you can say more about what you think that will be, or more generally, what you think the opportunities are in this next couple of months.
So, I think it's we're into a period, I think everyone knows, where the virus has spread and is quite extensive, and we're now backing into, in several cities and states in the country, problems with even access to healthcare and the potential burden on our healthcare system, including the hospitals. And so we're in a very challenging point right now. But I think the difference that will occur immediately, as is reflected by President-elect Biden's comments last night, is the clarity that there will be a national strategy that is science-based. And a national strategy that is science-based, I think, will become extremely important to the nation and moving to a different place, because I think there has been there has been a real focus on the vaccine, which is a very important thing. And it is a very important and strong tool, but it has become a panacea that we wait for, when what we need to do is use the basic public health measures that we know work. And the effectiveness of the basic public health measures, and by that I mean wearing a mask, being distanced, outside as much as possible, washing your hands, and then making sure if you are ill in any way that you don't, aren't with others and don't congregate, and make sure that you're not in any way, even if any question at all. Sometimes people would go to work sick. We don't do that. You can't do those things, or see others when you're sick. Just don't do that. And then the basics of testing, contact tracing, and isolation and quarantine. The combination of those things, when you think that the FDA will approve a vaccine that is 50% effective. So the vaccine that we have, I'm hopeful that it will be more than that. But remember, so those tools, and getting those tools used regularly, and that becoming a culture of what we do, I think can have a very, very important impact. We've all seen the numbers and the predictions of some in terms of just even what a mask mandate would do to reduce the number of deaths in our country. So I think what President-elect Biden was focused on last night is a national strategy. And the one thing, to our point earlier about healing, when we say national strategy, I think we have to be very, it is important to move beyond the dichotomy that is created in these debates. You're either for opening the economy, or you're for the health and safety of the people, depending on which side of this you're on. And we have to, that is not the right framing of the question. That's actually not the question. And on so many of these issues, we need to move beyond this framing of it's an extreme version of one or the other. It's actually, everyone wants both. And the real question, and the place where some people may differ, is on the exact path to get there. So let's get to the point of the arrow of that. And so I think as we move forward, that will be one of the important things.
Yeah, thank you. David, what do you see as crucial next steps in this next couple of months? And I don't know whether you want to share with us your perspective on how that's looking from abroad, from your read of abroad, or stay at home.
There's a audible sigh of relief, I want to say, from abroad. Certainly the messages I receive from foreign friends are along the lines of, thank goodness the American people have spoken, welcome back America, the mayor of Paris now famously said. So I've been hearing a lot of that. I think that Sylvia is right. Donald Trump had waged a lot in his campaign strategy on minimizing the virus, the not wearing the mask, saying this was not as bad as people claimed, it would be over soon. He made a big cosmic wager that was going to be right. And I think the country, as we go into this winter surge is going to welcome sharper, clearer policies. President-elect can't make policy, but hopefully he can work with Congress. I'm struck by how some members of the Republican caucus in the Senate seem willing to work with him. But I think health and prosperity go in tandem. We can't be prosperous and open up and boom again, as I think we will next year, without the virus being under control. Just to add a slightly different thought about what Biden can do in this interregnum. I think there is a natural healing process in politics, as in the human body, if it's given time to work. And one of the things that has troubled me most about Donald Trump and how he's governed is that for his own personal political advantage, every time there's a healing process at work, his approach has been to rip at the scab, just to go right at it and rip it open and let it bleed some more. That may sound harsh, but I really think that's what he's been doing. And I think anything from the Democratic side that rips at the scabs that people who voted for Donald Trump have, their wounds, their hurts, is a mistake. I think triumphalism among Democrats is a mistake. I think so preparing a campaign of revenge. I've heard a few lawyer friends talking about how we're going to prepare to prosecute every crime that Trump committed. This is not the time for that. It could have the opposite effect of what's needed. So, I think protecting the wounds that we feel, we in the broadest sense, not tearing at them, not letting the scab tissue form, letting us get on to the next phase. I think that's what it ought to feel like.
Thank you. I was heartened to hear both Kamala Harris and Joe Biden name explicitly in their speeches yesterday evening the intention, the commitment to root out systemic racism, and they used that phrase very explicitly. And it's a form of healing that is going to need a great deal of attention and intention. I don't know what how they will go about doing that, other than perhaps as beginning, as President Biden suggested, of putting together a governing body that is broadly representative of the American people. But that feels to me like a critically important element going forward. I don't know whether either one of you want to chime in on that. I'm going to turn to Molly in just a minute and invite questions. Yeah, David, please.
Just to briefly comment, there's a way in which the Biden story, the victory that we celebrated yesterday, is fundamentally about the issue of racial justice and really marks the path that will take us to a better place. To me, there are three key moments when I play back the story that led him to victory. The first, obviously, is the South Carolina primary. Joe Biden was dead in the road. His campaign had collapsed. And African-American voters in South Carolina, led by John Clyburn, basically decided it was so important to get Donald Trump out of the White House that they needed to put aside ideology, some of the agendas of candidates, and get behind the guy who could win. And Clyburn was so articulate in talking about that. The second key moment for me was when he chose Kamala Harris. It was a crucial decision. We're going to have an African-American woman as vice president of the United States. It's an incredible moment of change, I hope, and it is just on its face. And the final thing that happened is that in these key blue wall states, the Biden campaign managed to put together Black voters in cities like Philadelphia, Detroit, go down the list, with some white working class Democrats. Not enough, but certainly more than Hillary Clinton had to get the victories in Pennsylvania, in Michigan, and Wisconsin that ended up producing this outcome. So, that shows us the path. This team embodies it, and Joe Biden would not be president-elect if it wasn't for the Black voters of South Carolina and John Clyburn, who pointed the way. And so that makes me hopeful.
Yeah.
I would just add that I think we all have to think about the crises of the nation, and this issue of race has to be there. Right now, it's the health, it's COVID and the health, it's COVID and the economy, and it is our nation at a critical point on its journey to making a step function change in these issues of racial justice and really taking head on the issues of systemic racism. And I think it's extremely important. And I think that President-elect and Vice President-elect have given every indication that they will treat it as such in terms of the important priority that it is. And I think it's extremely important for communities like ours to make sure that we maintain it as a priority, and that we maintain it as a priority in what we do, both as individuals to better understand how we both act and behave and make decisions and lead and do our work based on a fact that we have been in a world of systemic racism for so long. So we have to examine ourselves as individuals, and then I think we have to examine what are the pieces and parts within whatever communities that we're part of that even we may not have noticed or known, that there are things and parts of it that are reinforcing of that structural racism that has existed. And so I think it is the job of the leaders, and I think this election, I think, has told us a little bit about, for many of us, maybe we didn't understand the importance of leadership. But boy, I think we all think it is an extremely important part of any journey that we as a nation are going to take on any number of things. And so I think we need to turn to our leaders, but I think we all as individuals need to take on that responsibility, especially in this issue, because this is an issue, in a certain way, it's a lot like COVID. In COVID, public health works this way. The government has to do its part, but we each have to do our parts. Like, everyone, please get your flu shot if you haven't. Please, do the mask wearing, all of those things. We are active participants in fighting the coronavirus as citizens. We need to be led, and we need to have the tools and the communication from our government and our leaders. And similarly, in issues of race, we have to be active participants of the change. At the same time, there needs to be leadership.
Yeah, Sylvia, perhaps you were already speaking to this when you spoke about our community, and I'm not sure whether who is included in the hour there, but I'm wondering if you could say anything, and I'll ask the same of you, David, about how being a person of faith, being a Christian, has shaped any aspect of how you have been engaging the politics of this hour.
So I think that faith, which I'm fortunate has been a part of my life for an extended period of it has been a part of my entire life. And so it shapes sort of all of the steps along the way. And I think my faith is important. And I think it's important in terms of, it is the framework. In terms of, it provides the basic value structure that I think about, and having a framework in which you build your decisions and your life choices and your joy and how you handle challenges, having a system that's rooted in values and, the reflection, love better than hate, any number of things that are just at the root of our faith. And then I also think it's important because I believe that faith provides support, that whether that is the support of the individuals or the support that we draw in terms of how we think about our faith and what we believe as Christians, in terms of the support that we get provided each day by something that is greater, that is bigger, that is an approach and a story. It's related. All these are circles that are interrelated. The framework to me is related to the support, is then related to the strength. And it is, that strength that comes from being like on a team. And I know we don't describe it that way. And as Episcopalians, boy, we never describe ourselves as like a team. We shy away and we like, woo, we can't do that. We're Episcopalians. That's part of why we're Episcopalians, because we are not people who go out and do that. And I actually think that's a question we need to examine. When I say we, and I was talking about our community, I was talking about St. Columba's, I was talking about the Episcopalians, I was talking about Christians, I actually was talking about our religious community. And I think we need to examine kind of where we are on that line in terms of how we think about it, because most people, like, when you're in a leadership role like I am, people thought it was odd that I had a thing on my desk that said pray. And that thing had been given to me by evangelical Christians. They send them to every cabinet secretary, but I actually used mine, and put it on my desk, and everyone thought that, be careful, everything, but like that being a part in terms of strength. And then the last part of why I think my faith, what does it do now? The things it does now, it does all the time. And that is community. And a community that does those things like strength and support, but also makes you reflect beyond yourself. The idea of community, it is to me, it's a New Testament concept. When Christ, turned everything on its head in terms of how he defined community, how he thought who should be a part of that community, how you should think about hearing about others, those less fortunate, those of the other. All of those concepts to me kind of get into community. So for me, it is an important part of like the whole deal, day to day, and both in previous times, but especially during this time, I needed those elements.
Good. We're going to get you in the pulpit once we can get back in the pulpits. Thank you, Sylvia.
Just briefly, to speak from the perspective of my fuzzy but long enduring Episcopal Christian faith, I have never believed in a God that intervenes in football games or elections. So the idea of praying for Joe Biden's victory, I mean, I certainly prayed for the country. In my fuzzy theology, I think God gave us free will, and He gave us a knowledge of good and evil. But God didn't predetermine how we would choose, and people can choose evil, and bad things can happen to good countries full of faithful people. And I feared that was happening to our country. We do have free will. That's God's greatest gift to us, in some ways, life, and then that freedom. The other thing I know from my faith life is true in every part of life, is that loving your enemies really is the only strategy that works. I mean, if you're in a confrontation with somebody emotionally, in life, in marriage, with your children, with friends, with business rivals, trying to just smash your way through doesn't work. It just produces more misery. The only way out is to put yourself in a different place that's about love and faith. And I think probably we've all had that moment where we just we close our eyes and pray, and then we're in a different place where we see problems differently and we begin to solve them. So, that somehow I hope that's what happens for our country. Right now, we have free will. A lot of people have made choices I don't understand, but I love the things that are at the core of our faith are the way out.
Thank you. That feels like that's a sort of a full circle around back to the process and the substance of the love is both the means and the end. Yeah, Molly, I know you've been tracking what others have been commenting on or asking.
Yeah, thanks, Ledlie. I'd like to start with bringing in a couple of questions about healing and about folks who voted for President Trump as we approach that task. So one is just, how should we address the many good motives that folks might have had to vote for President Trump? And then more specifically, how can we frame healing with Trump supporters, many of whom do believe in white supremacy, are anti-Black or anti-people of color, and are sometimes virulently anti-immigrant? So thinking generally about how to approach folks who have voted for Trump in this healing process, and then specifically on these questions of race going forward. So we'll start there.
So I think as we think about that question and that tension, I think that it's important that we have greater clarity. David, you've used that word clarity a number of times, and I think it actually is quite important. And I think it is the clarity about the way that we should do things in terms of what we believe, in terms of listening and engaging and hearing from other people, but also combined with the clarity of the values that we hold. And I think that's what's going to be hard, and why the healing is going to be a messy thing. So for instance, the question in terms of combining the two questions, the issue of how do we engage those, and we were talking about it a little bit before when we got on, the question of, if you do know people who have supported Trump, it is engaging them in terms of, help me understand what you're feeling. And when they are expressing that, they are going to tell you why, and you're going to find out, were they afraid that their taxes would be raised? Were they afraid that their way, what they refer to as their way of life, would be changed? Would they, what is it? And then kind of going into those things. And the places where there are those conversations about white supremacy and concepts that, frankly, so many of us feel are abhorrent. But I think it takes, and this is the one thing we're not good at, it's our society today, we are not good at the time it takes to work it through. And I think on the issues of race, the time it takes to understand what our, Black brothers and sisters have lived for their entire lives, it takes time for us to understand that and then be able to act on it. Similarly, for those people who are in a very different place, the time that it takes to understand, like, why do you feel that? What do you believe? How does that connect to your Christian faith, if they are? And so I think that this process and how we do it is, one, we do have to reach out and have people be heard. And we want people to be heard in this race conversation that we're having, in terms of our communities of color, making sure that we have heard and are listening. Similarly, as we're thinking through this particular issue, and the two problems are not at all the same. So I want to be very careful about not comparing them, but this function of listening and taking the time to kind of work through at the same time that you are just clear about why you hold the values that you hold, and where you stand on it.
I can't add much to what Sylvia said, except that I do think it's a combination of reaching out one by one to people I know who are passionate Trump supporters and engaging them just to talk. How are you feeling? But there's a point that Sylvia's made, and I just think we need to reflect on more carefully. I do. In this period of healing, we don't want to tolerate or accommodate ideas that are pernicious, that have been allowed to grow, encouraged to grow. Racist views, anti-immigrant views have been given free rein. There are things, people have bad views, but somehow, and I think Biden's gentle decency is going to be the best advertisement. Kamala Harris, same way. The life she lived as the daughter of a Jamaican immigrant and an Indian immigrant. They're going to show us a path for dialogue and discussion that's going to have systemic racism at the center. We heard that last night. And it'll happen, with them as leaders. It'll happen with us one by one. It'll happen in our communities. It's not going to be easy. This has been going on a long time, and we've been struggling with it for a long time. But I think of the world that I grew up in and how different it is today. And, I just have to be confident that we'll move towards that goal of racial justice more and more and more. That's what's happened in my lifetime.
Thanks. This next question begins by someone pointing out they're struck by David's metaphor of ripping the scab off healing wounds, thus keeping them open and raw. From early in Obama's first term, I described, the question asker, the virulent reactions to him as lancing a boil. Coming from the South, I was disheartened but not surprised to see what had been under the surface suddenly erupt into bleeding wounds. Do either of these metaphors show possible paths forward and practical actions that can be implemented? David, I don't know if you have further thoughts on your analogy of ripping the scab off the wound.
So I talked about that and what I feel about it. I just would note and then ask Sylvia to think with us about the other thing that the questioner said about lancing a boil. And lancing a boil is the opposite of gently, letting the scab tissue form. There are some things that are dangerous, some infections that are going to kill you unless you lance the boil, unless you get that poison out. And so I think that's really a wise comment. Just turn it to Sylvia to figure out how we distinguish between letting scabs heal and lancing boils.
I think that part of the way you might be able to distinguish the two is I'll go back to, as we think about this the virus, the coronavirus, there's some really important things we need to understand about its transmission and about how to stop that transmission. And so we have to understand the structure of the virus, and we have to understand how the virus attaches to cells and other things in our body. And I think similarly in this space with regard to these issues, we need to understand why it is that people have that point of view. What creates an idea of, it is asking the real questions. starting, you know, at their root and having very difficult conversations about, do you have, you know, why do you believe, you know, why do you believe what you're saying in terms of these groups of people? Why do you believe that this group of people is any less than that group of people? And where does that come from? And really understanding the deep issues. And it is like, to me, understanding that deep science of the virus, including what it is, you know, in a world where, you know, they're actually, you know, the concepts of the historical evolution and why people have certain feelings and approaches, and how does one work through those things. And so that's, I think, how you get to the difference between the lancing and the pulling the scab off, is getting to the real substance of why are people feeling what they are, and why are people thinking the way that they are. And one of the questions that was a question, interestingly, I think from that is a question that could come from either side of the issue, that I just kind of saw pop through, and I may not have seen it all, was just the question of when people use the phrase structural racism. At a start, in terms of the lancing the boil versus the scab pulling, is can we all start with definitions of terms? And in the organizations that I'm in, whether that's the boards that I serve on or leadership in American University, we really are trying to do some of the very hard work so that we all actually get to an understanding of what words mean. You know, when we use those words like structural racism, or what does the word white supremacy mean, or what do these words mean? We all use them and things are attached to them. It's just like my example of Obamacare. People put Obamacare and thought it was socialized medicine, went like, no, it's actually market-based medicine. It's actually using the market. And so getting ourselves away from, you know, to that next level of, can we understand the substance of what we're talking about? Can we get the grounding in terms so that we can move to the next stage? And I think that's an important part of distinguishing boil scab.
All right, thank you. We have time for one last question. We have just a minute or two left. So Sylvia and David, if you could be brief in your answers, but I think this is a good one to end on, which is, how do you address the unconstrained self-interest reflected in the opposition to exercising caution or wearing masks and building community, as Sylvia discussed? Is leadership enough?
Let me start, and then I'll leave the last word to Sylvia, and I'm going to just briefly quote something that was observed by de Tocqueville in the 1830s when he was traveling around America. I quoted this in a column, but I think it's apposite. He wrote, individualism at first only saps the virtue of public life, but in the long run, it attacks and destroys all others and is at length absorbed in downright selfishness. That's our American paradox. We love our individualism. Don't tread on me. That's our, you know, kind of our national, I want to say our national religion. But it can get toxic. It can become raw selfishness and self-interest. And so we need to get the good individualism that's part of our collective life as a country.
Agree, and would just say that I think the way we do that, though, is to build and strengthen the communities, and as much as we can. And, you know, Robert Putnam's book, Bowling Alone, and it was many years ago, talks about how, and the bowling alone, the reason it's called Bowling Alone is because individuals stopped bowling together. And that it is a symbol of how we don't operate as a community, and everything about our lives, commuting. There are so many things that contribute to that, even how we engage. And I think I'll just end with, that is why I think it is so important to engage in a community like St. Columba's, in terms of one of the things that is a very important step that people take to get to that community point of view. So we push back against the concept that de Tocqueville and David just quoted and articulated.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sylvia and David. I really appreciate spending this time and hearing your thoughts, and your opening these things up for us. And I'm super grateful to all the folks that have been here. And I haven't had a chance yet to look at all the comments and questions. I'm looking forward to following up on that. But we certainly have our work to do. as individuals and as a community. And I'm reminded in the closing remarks that each of you just made of the prayer of Teresa of Avila, that Christ has no body now but ours, no hands, no feet but ours. Ours are the arms with which Christ will share love. And we have a lot of God's love to get out there and to embrace and receive in these months ahead. So thank you very much, and may God give us strength and grace to be loving, alone and together in all that we do. So peace be with you. Go in peace.
Amen.